Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast. What works in application security? How to detect and remediate application vulnerabilities and block attacks with Contrast Security. Sponsored by Contrast Security. My name is Carol Auth of the SANS Institute. Today's featured speakers are John Pescatore, Director of Emerging Technologies at SANS, and he will be moderating today's webcast, and Joshua Bentley, Application Security Manager at Liberty Mutual. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to John.
Thanks, Carol, and welcome everyone. I'm John Pescatore. Welcome to another What Works webcast here at SANS on the 12th day of the 12th month of the year, with probably about 12 more days before the holidays take over. And so we have a little bit more time to do some thinking about where we're going to make areas of progress in security in 2019. And application security is one of my favorite areas. We actually have seen a lot of progress being made in the past couple of years by more and more companies, and I hope this What Works will help you out in the audience make similar progress. Let me explain the What Works program. It's one of my favorite things to do at SANS. I joined SANS about 6 years ago after almost 14 years at Gartner, and one thing I found at Gartner and in my security career even before Gartner is we've got lots of failure stories in security. There's headlines just about every day about a breach or an exposure or a denial of service attack that's succeeded. There's very rarely success stories about the companies that manage to avoid those very same attacks. So at Gartner, I used to do lots of case study notes over the years, getting those success stories out. And then here at SANS, we have sort of a three-pronged approach. This time of year, we announced the SANS Difference Makers Award. This year it's going to about 14 people, 9 different teams of people who've been able to make real advances in security at their companies, and that's sort of celebrating the people. We have another thing we do most years, the SANS Technology Award, sort of the best of, where we ask the SANS community which products help them the most. And then sort of tying everything together is the What Works program, which is, I call it, sort of showing the security processes, mixes of people and smart ideas and technology and products that have succeeded. And that one is funded by vendors. Vendors give me their users to talk to. We do an interview and then produce a paper and do one of these webinars like we're doing here today. But it's just part of this overall effort, and I'll give you links to the SANS website at the end where you can find details and examples of all of these. So let me give you an idea of what we're going to do here on the webcast for the next half an hour or so. I'm going to give an overview of this application security topic. It's something you'll see I'm almost 20 years into sort of being a part of and following and trying to help drive forward. And then Joshua and I are going to sort of recreate our interview where I go through the What Works standard questions format, and we produced a paper from that you'll all get copies of. But as we're going along, feel free to ask questions. We'll save plenty of time at the end for questions as well. But on the right-hand side of your screen, you see that toolbar, and you see the little questions window there. As Joshua and I are talking, I'll try to monitor that, and we might be able to take some of your questions as we go along. If not, we'll get to them at the end. If you are watching a recorded version of this webinar, at the end, I'll also give you an email address where you can send your questions, and we'll get you an answer from whoever can give you the best answer. So with that, let's get started. So I mentioned spending almost 20 years. I guess the best physical evidence I can show you is a research note I wrote in Gartner back in 2001, giving out a layered approach to preventing what at the time was calling web application compromises. So if you remember, that's sort of back when web commerce was really taking off, and we were very immature in our knowledge of the ways people might compromise web applications. And we're just starting to see e-commerce and banking apps and sort of heavy-duty stuff go online. So I put together this sort of from the bottom up, do at least the minimum things at the bottom, put a network firewall in front of your web servers, apply checklists that were out there from the SANS of the world or the Gartners or some others that were out there on how to configure Windows or Linux, and the Oracle and the database and went IIS or whichever web server you were using at the time. And then do some detection above that, because things were going to get through. And then if on the endpoint you could put at the time was calling a policy enforcement layer, and then on top of that, application specific firewalling. There was no such thing as web application firewalls back then or application level firewalls. So the idea between these two things was to implement controls, particularly on HTTP and SSL, HTTPS type transactions going through. Now back then in e-commerce land, there were these hardened HPUX and some even on VMS and old operating systems, none on Windows at the time, that were sort of hardened, multi-level, secure, stripped-down operating systems that were running commerce systems that were in use at the time, but they were obviously really expensive, both in an acquisition cost and a cost of ownership. But if you're going to go all the way to the top and security trumped cost all the way, that was the 2001 view of things. About 7 years later, I updated that note in 2008 now with a little more modern. By then, the Center for Internet Security configuration standards had come out, the benchmarks, which are really good and still out there today. Firewalls and intrusion prevention had made some movements forward to have more than just port pair type security, to do more stateful inspection of protocols like HTTP and a little bit of content inspection. And then I used to go through this two-pronged thing. The best way was to remove vulnerabilities from your web apps through application vulnerability testing before you allowed apps to go production, or worst case, once they went production, get them fixed. If you couldn't do that, you could resort to, well, we know our apps are going to be vulnerable, so we'll go to step 3B and put a web application firewall in front and hope to prevent exposing any paths to those vulnerable apps. If you could afford it, do both. Make your apps as secure as possible, but also have suspenders in addition to the belt, and put a WAF in front. And then instrument the host as the final to make sure if something gets through everything, you're still going to notice. And then an asterisk towards there still are these appliances, very expensive around. We would still see them used in critical infrastructure systems and the like, or classified government type systems, but they were dead in private industry, even at the banking side of things. So I left Gartner in 2012. If you sort of look through their web security research these days, the web's a much more complicated world, and securing web applications is a much more complicated problem. There's all kinds of multiple layers and APIs and different ways of talking. It's not just simple three-tier architectures anymore, but some of the basics still apply in the sort of modern advice you see. Still have a web application firewall up there. They don't show it in the picture, but still do things to inspect and minimize vulnerabilities in all the different layers before you go production. So that 2008 advice sort of stayed pretty solid here for this more complex world. What's been key is over the past number of years, many of the products have made some level of advancements in getting past some of the old problems, false positives in vulnerability testing, or false blocking in web application firewall, or false negatives, not finding vulnerabilities, and then failing to block them. And basically, over the years, we've seen some of the better products sort of get past the point where the damage to business was potentially higher than the protection. And that's something I've been looking at here in the past couple of years, doing a number of what works of these what works type presentations and studies since I've been at SANS. Now also, some of those checklists and those guidances have sort of modernized and caught up with us these days. So one thing I've been a fan of since the 90s, working at Gartner and certainly here at SANS over the years, is what have been typically called, used to be called the SANS 20 critical security controls. It's now been taken over by the Center for Internet Security and called the CIS critical security controls. And the latest version, version 7, you see a picture on your screen, and I'll give you a link to download more information, show you sort of the basic level of things you should do to have a secure foundation for building business systems on top of, then the foundational security ones to move up to that sort of application level and make sure you can secure business. Then the organizational is a lot more sort of people and process type things. Well, web security plays a key role in there. And there you see the sort of control 18 is the one that focuses on this, and in the standards, in the documents, the CIS documents, they give you these entity relationship diagrams that sort of show you on the left the security type controls you might put in place, and on the right the computing systems and the information you're protecting. And you can see web application firewall down at the bottom, code analysis or security application vulnerability testing, educating developers in security above that, and secure coding standards are back to sort of some of those checklists. These are still the key ways of achieving basic security hygiene on our web applications. So here we are, we've been sort of known what to do for quite a long time, for pretty close to 20 years, getting the sort of educational level, the skills of the people, getting the products that implement the controls to improve, and getting that mix between getting processes in place and being able to use these tools at the speed of business. And that's especially important you hear today as we see companies moving to more agile development type processes. It's one thing to be able to test apps for security and go through things and take weeks or months for a once or twice a year release cycle. It's another thing for week-long or 2-week-long sprints and very rapid turnover and need to continually refresh production applications. So those are sort of the movements forward we've needed to see, and I think we have a great example here as we go through the what works we're going to go through today. The bottom line is, in just about everywhere, every area of security, we can detect when things go wrong, right? Most in the SANS community have a 48-hour mean time to detect when something goes wrong, to detect an incident. Now you see studies out there where it takes a year, 18 months. Well, those are companies that aren't investing in the training and the skills in the people or in the controls or in the processes that the SANS community typically is. Our surveys typically show right around that 48-hour to detect. Well, obviously, we're getting better at incident response skills when we're detecting quickly, but every time we can avoid an attack or minimize an attack, that's the security program just demonstrated way higher value to the business side. So the more we can move upstream to either very early in that attack, or ideally putting things in place before the attacks even happen that are going to block or mitigate the business impact of those attacks, is key. The business is paying for the security program to avoid as much damage as possible, not simply to get quicker about pointing out business damage. So we can do lots more in prevention, we can do lots more in early detection, we can do lots more in more surgical mitigation, and that's really key. So those are the things to focus on as we look at today's What Works we're going to go through. So with that, let me ask Josh to turn his microphone on, and we'll get started. Are you there, Joshua?
Hey, John, I'm here.
Okay. How about we start, give us an idea of your background and your role at Liberty Mutual.
I've got about 20 years experience in IT security. Started at Novell back in '97, and then did a little short stint at E&Y for about 5 years, and have been involved in security and developed in different aspects, a lot of time doing compliance type work, but the last 9 years at Liberty Mutual, I've been doing primarily application security type stuff. We've been focusing a lot on trying to improve the efforts to identify and fix vulnerabilities in application security much quicker, shifting left per se.
So your title is Application Security Manager. Do you live in the security group? Do you live in the IT or the app dev group? Where do you live?
Security.
Okay. So what sort of business problems, or why did you start going down the path where you ended up choosing a solution like Contrast Security?
Primarily, I wanted to be able to improve the speed that we were able to meet the needs of the business. Lots of things are changing, new technologies coming down the pipe, and as everything's going agile, that meant we had to be faster. And we had a lot of different solutions, static application testing, dynamic application security testing, And in all of the different scenarios, we still were looking for something that could really integrate into our CI/CD pipeline. And with the continuous integration, continuous delivery, we wanted something that would allow us to find vulnerabilities without find and remediate vulnerabilities without impacting a lot of the aggressive schedules that we had starting to come down and perceived a lot more of in the future.
Now, it seems like there's a couple reasons why companies move to move fast, or the security solutions need to get faster. The business or app side goes to agile or DevOps, do everything faster, or starting to adopt more cloud-based capabilities that can be spun up more quickly and new ones go out more quickly. Both of those, either of those, what was the main driver?
Yeah, all of that actually were components of it. Definitely cloud in the future, and so I would say yes to all of those.
Okay, so you said you're already using some dynamic application security analysis tools, static ones. So you had some vendors you're already using, and you decided you need to go faster and higher accuracy, et cetera. So how'd you proceed from there? Did you do a formal RFP, do a bake-off, or how did you proceed to test candidate solutions?
Yeah, it was a bit of a bake-off. We had a bunch of different solutions in-house already, and so it was just a matter of adding contrast into the mix and then comparing the results. And we found that we were very satisfied with what contrast had to offer. I found that the accuracy was better, that the quantity of applicable findings was better, and so it gave us a good amount of assurance we could rely on what they had to offer, and including the ability to do things in I call the next gen technology way, integrating into things a little bit better than what some of the prior tools we were using were able to do.
Now it seems like the contrast solution is a little different than other approaches that are typically more either application scanners or code analysis type tools. Can you sort of explain how you implemented contrast in order to test it?
Well, yeah, I can give our experience. I mean, you can speak to contrast more about the technical details about how they use their tools, but we were finding that with the ability of adding this agent, right, to be able to be a component within the application, they call it instrumenting the application. It gave us a lot better details, a lot better of a view than what we had in the past. We were able to find the amount of detail of a vulnerability was more accurate. It told us more about what was happening within our application, and we appreciated the ability to provide that to the developers. When developers came in and they saw it, they were able to have confidence that they weren't getting any false positives. They could see how the vulnerabilities had the potential to impact the application, and that was something that was really important to getting them to be wanting to use it. And I think that was a key determination in us wanting to go for it, is it was able to bring a lot of the people that needed to use it. It was able to bring them on board, helping them to say, hey, I use that tool, and that's a key. If they're not going to use the tool, then it doesn't matter how good it is. But they were willing to take a look at it. They tried it, they liked it, and they saw that the details coming in were good. And beyond that, it gave us the RASP functionality, which was something that other tools weren't providing at the time.
So in your initial sort of bake-off, did you pick out a single application or a single development team and try it out, get their feedback? How did you do that?
Well, we've got teams across the globe. So we picked a couple in from Asia, a couple from Europe, and a couple from Latin America, and had applications in each of those.
Okay, now I think it's worth explaining to people how you sort of got going, since you mentioned the agent, but you also mentioned instrumenting the application, which sort of sounds a lot different than anything people might have been doing. Can you explain how that happened, and how did that integrate in what you were doing?
Well, again, I'll leave the technical details to contrast to describe for people, but for us on our side, it wasn't very difficult. You put the application you put the agent in with the application, and it loads into runtime and actually becomes part of the application. And with that, it has sensors, and it's able to define the metadata about the application, parameters that come in and out, and how they're used. And it works well.
Okay, so you've got the agent installed on those endpoints, and then what sort of information are you getting? It does some vulnerability analysis there. What sort of information, or you called it telemetry, is coming from it?
Yeah, it works in a function similar to New Relic. I don't know if other people have used that, but it is able to listen in to the runtime environment and pull out data, and it's that telemetry, I think, that really won over our teams. It gave us things that we really found useful. For example, it was one of the first times that we were able to have a tool so quickly could give us an architecture diagram of the application stack, told us where the data was going, where the different data stores were. That was something the developers saw that, and they're like, oh yeah, that's my app. It's got all those different components, and it gave them a nice little live picture. It gave them live view of processes, data going in and out, what services were being ran. It gave them a view into the libraries, whether or not the libraries were up to date, current, whether they had CVEs in them or not, and then it gave them vulnerability details, which were more accurate, easier to understand, and gave them suggestions on how to fix them according to the language they were coding in. All of it together, it was a pretty nice user interface that was appealing, and the most appealing part was just how fast it was to get up and going for the development teams.
So architecturally, there's the agent, and then for the development teams to sort of see this information, is there some user software they use? Is there a management server? Is it a cloud-based approach? How does that work?
They give you two options. We chose the cloud-based approach, where we have a centralized user interface. They call it, I think, Team Server, the Contrast Team Server. And all of your applications call back to that, giving the information that we would want to provide. Now, again, the appealing thing, the next generation technology, as well as the ability to integrate. The developers don't have to go back to that, right? There's a lot of other tools that we'd used at the time that had a SaaS server that you could go out to and look at a consolidated effort. That was a great win at the time, but we wanted something that integrated into the pipeline, and that's where Contrast really started to stand out. We integrated at several different points of our pipeline. At the very beginning in the dev environment, we're integrating it into the IDE in like Eclipse or Visual Studio, and Contrast has the ability to take the details that it finds and pipe it back in there for the developers to fix right in that development phase. Now, to us, that's something that really was a high goal of ours, is to shift left and to be able to have that savings from fixing vulnerabilities as far left as development. The next phase in QA, we had the ability to pipe in Contrast to Jira, where we do a lot of our bug tracking and defect tracking. Developers can then be tracking that and fix it along the lines with all the other defects that they might be working on, and instead of having a separate security list. That for me was a big goal. One of the things that I've noticed in my experience is you might be able to win over and almost by favor get security teams to give you extra time to work on these queues of security issues that you wanted them to work on, to review and identify. In the olden days, right, when security tools were first coming, what that usually meant for them is there was a big long list of false positives, and after you cajoled them into looking at this list, they'd spend some time, and after a while said, guys, it's just not worth our time. Everything you've given me was full of false positives and nothing really impacted, and I just didn't have time for it. Security's come a long way, and now with a tool even like Contrast, it really takes it up another level for us, being able to give them really relevant information. You truly start to feel like a partner with them in improving what they're providing, and being able to integrate it into something that's streamlined, not taking them away from what they do, but augmenting what they do with the ability to provide details that helps them achieve that. That was something that quote unquote really was working for us, right? That's what works.
By instrumenting the app during development, you had it integrated in with the IDE and the development process. That's typically the hardest environment for false positive. How did you find its performance as far as false positives are concerned?
It's been really great. I think it wasn't too long ago where the idea of zero false positives was even achievable. It was just a couple of years until we started hearing more and more people start claiming that. But I would say that Contrast did a really good job of making sure that they've maintained that mantra and been able to support it, back it up with performance.
Now, you mentioned integrating with the IDE in the front, Jira and bug tracking later on. Is that those integrations something you had to do? Those come out of the box?
A little of both. So IDE, you can go out to your add-on stores. Like if you're in Eclipse, you can go out and add the add-on from Eclipse. Jira actually isn't a tab within the Contrast UI where you can go to the integration section, and they've got different integrations: Slack, HipChat, and Jira integrations that you can configure from inside the portal there.
Okay, so you worked with one or more of the app teams, got this started, got their feedback, then you move forward. So how does it work when there's a new project or new team put together for a new app? Since it's integrated with the IDE, as soon as they get started, the agent will be downloaded and the application instrumented, or did you need to educate the developers? That was sort of the first step they would need to do.
That actually was part of the big reason we were able to go to Contrast. Even from the very beginning in our POCs, it was quick. We set up time with these teams, and it took about an hour. Usually we schedule about an hour, and in that hour we were able to walk them through the deployment of the agent. Restart the server with the agent on it, find the agent in the console, teach them how to use Contrast, and then also deliver them the vulnerability details, which in the past had taken, sometimes, much longer when waiting for depending what third party is got to create a report and send it back. And being able to accomplish all of that within an hour just had them, raving. I mean, they came back with such high feedback that it kind of started to be an organic growth amongst the developers. And again, that was something that really put our decision to expand our use of Contrast, because the developers were asking for it, and to get developers saying, "Hey, we really like this tool. We want to use it more. Can we install it? Can we apply licenses in other areas?" That was something that meant a lot. So just having a quick 1 hour education that got them enough to get started. There's more of tweaking and learning and being able to use it more efficiently in other areas, but with a quick 1 hour meeting, that was usually enough to get people going, and then they went about learning more and expanding on their own.
Now, what languages are you doing your app dev in, or at least what languages were you using Contrast for?
Primarily Java and .NET, and that's pretty much their sweet spot. I do know that they also have some Node now, some Node.js, some other areas, but primarily Java, and then some .NET is where we've been using it most.
Okay, now we've pretty much focused on I think what Contrast calls the access functionality in the product, or the vulnerability assessment and finding weak spots. They also have, you mentioned, a RASP, or runtime application security or self-protection. I talked about web app firewalls as sort of the old external approach. You did use that functionality as well?
Yeah, we do. We found it to be quite effective. We use all kinds of different web application firewalls. We've got experience from, I would say, some of the best in the industry. Takes usually some security teams to have the understanding to tune and configure those, but we found it to be pretty straightforward. And the development teams actually were able to have people watch this come in, wait for any false positive if there were any, and move it to block mode in pretty quick time with pretty low amount of effort. So we're very pleased with the WAF functionality that they provided with their RASP.
And just to be clear, this is RASP being done by the agent that was added or integrated into the application. There is no external blocking or anything going on.
Yeah, that's right. Self-protecting software, I think, is what the contrast says. You know, you've entered the era of self-protecting applications, and I think because of where they put the agent in, it gives it that ability. I kind of liked this technology as I learned about it. The theory of this technology is they have a view into the application being in the runtime to be able to see the methods being used, watch the input parameters come in, how the application then uses that, and then how some of those parameters are used later on. And that allows them to not just use signature-based or a dictionary-based type matching to say, oh, we need to block this event because we're seeing the right characters or something. But they're actually able to say, hey, no, this is a certain method that we know is bad, right? We know this isn't something that has to happen, and therefore they can block it and say, yeah, that's someone actually trying to exploit you. They give you probes where they say, yeah, this is potentially something bad, but they can identify an actual exploit when someone's actually trying to send a payload that would cause problems. And that was a kind of a step up, I think, in what we've seen in the past, and it allows, I think, more accuracy as well as fewer false positives, because you're not going to be blocking on something that just matched a certain case. Another neat feature of that is when new vulnerabilities come out, or all of a sudden you get emails saying, oh, we just found Struts is doing it again, right? Well, Contrast was already blocking that based on the fact that it was looking not just for a CVE or a match to some signature, but it was saying, well, that was something, in one of those cases that's just doing something bad, and we didn't allow that type of classification of bad things, and so we're protected already.
So there's from a update to the software, there's not signatures being pushed out when new CVEs come out. There's some basic policy enforcement or rules that get updated periodically. Are there still updates that get pushed out?
Yeah, there's still going to be some updates. It still maintains a list of CVEs that they match in order to report and call it, the CVE. But that's not based on how it does its blocking, right? It uses its own determinations on what it decides it's going to call something malicious or not.
So we talked about there's a developer view when they're sort of in the development environment. You can have a QA view. Is there on, I guess, the portal, since you're using it from the cloud, is there some sort of security manager view where the security team is seeing the block or alerts or blocking or that type of stuff, where it's your view, not something the developers are seeing?
Yes, but I think they have access to that view as well. I wouldn't say it's not them, but we do have a screen that is dedicated to attacks and what's actually landing, what's not landing, what's being blocked. And it's good for the developers to see that. I think that helps drive urgency in getting them to roll things out quicker and put things into block mode. That telemetry, that view really is another compelling reason that the Contrast is able to get a hold with an organization, is because it helps people have visibility into what's really happening, to risks they might have, and then provides a way for them to fix it in a rather economical and versus money and time way.
So since you're familiar with web app firewalls, there's a good deal of tuning required when the app changes in particular. How's the level of time required to essentially tune the protect capability or deal with making the decisions whether to turn blocking mode on or not?
I think the level of effort and the time's been less for us. We've had pretty good results actually in being able to get it turned on much quicker than what we had using other types of web application firewalls. We still use them. We use them in layers because nothing's 100%. But it just took a lot longer for us to get to a blocked mode using other other firewalls. And I mentioned a little bit earlier, part of it is just because of the technical expertise that was required to be able to tune in the other types of firewalls. This one didn't require nearly as much, and it was quite easy to figure out what needed to be done. Anytime there was a question, contrast support was there to help us through it and teach us how to do it, so the next time we were able to do it on our own.
Okay, let me go through some of my standard questions. So how long have you been using contrast security operationally?
Just short of a year now.
Okay, so since you've been going for about a year, anything you do differently, knowing what you know now, any lessons learned you can pass on to our audience?
Well, we're a really large organization, so I don't know that it would apply to everybody, but making sure that when you add in so many different applications and groups and layers of groups, multi-tiered groups of users, making sure that you have a plan for the naming conventions and access groups. Just is you start rolling people in. For us, we found that they got excited about it, maybe share it with their friends, and then developers want to kind of go and figure something out. They'll look up the website and try and deploy an agent, but they didn't use our run book, which we created specifically to make sure that they used naming conventions and groups and things that allowed for multi-tiered level access and provisioning. And so then they'd call up and say, hey, I just deployed an asset and I don't see it, and it's then takes more time for us to go back and say, well, you need to use our configurations, and if you don't, then you won't see it. So there was a little bit more of a complexity that we had with a large organization that we had to layer in, and a little bit of going back and fixing things instead of making sure that everybody was aware from the beginning that there was a real important need to follow those kind of constraints that we put on them. But not too bad. I don't think from a contrast perspective, just the tool itself, that there was anything that I think that I would give as a recommendation for others to use.
Okay. Since you essentially have all the applications, production applications instrumented, do you produce some sort of almost dashboard or sort of summary view of what sort of the vulnerability status of applications are? It seems like it would give you some interesting visibility.
It does give us good visibility, but again, we're a multi-tiered organization, and so it gives a really good high-level everything view. But they're still developing that kind of tiered level. I can get data pulled out the back and run some reports in Excel if I wanted to look at just one department or one country, their apps and their views. But they're still working on that type of reporting within the user interface.
Okay, so you've been going for about a year. You've got it rolled out. What are your sort of plans for the future? Is it more spread it out to more applications, more teams, or do more with the technology? What do you see coming in the future?
Yeah, a little bit of that. Definitely spreading it out to more teams, taking advantage of the integrations a little bit more, maybe build more workflows within Jira and how to have some more automation in trying to get things fixed and reported back as being fixed. The other component that we're doing is we're tying it in so that for things that go out to the cloud, right, we're having the agents automatically be deployed as part of our infrastructure, and then once they go through the CI/CD, where in this case at Jenkins, and in most cases, Jenkins is then able to do a check to say, hey, has Contrast done their review, and are the results beneath the threshold that you're desiring? And if it doesn't, then Jira has the ability to stop it, right? To break that build and prevent it from moving forward in production. And so that's a lot of the next level of maturity with this tool, is trying to integrate it more and create some more automation so that the CI/CD pipeline can have that as a component in making sure that the things that go to production meet the levels that we desire within our organization.
Neat. So that would work for whether it was local data center workloads or cloud-based workloads.
Exactly.
Neat. So you called it sort of next generation technology, and it is a little more complex than either just doing, code testing or a separate WAF. How, since it's fairly complex technology, how have you found the support from Contrast Security?
They've got some really great people. I found that a lot of the people I worked with are some of the best as far as app support goes. I do know that they still are a smaller company, and they are getting stretched a little bit, but they are really great, and you know that they've got the ability to answer your questions, and they get to them rather quickly. I would like to see over time additional support, but we're also kind of known as being demanding customers. So I think we have high standards, and we want things yesterday when we ask for them. But I think overall they are some of the best that we've worked with as far as application support, vendor support type staff goes.
Okay, I'll throw in one final question. Any other questions from our audience? Enter them into the question box on that toolbar on the right-hand side, and we'll get to your questions. Since it obviously costs money to go to Contrast Security, go to any vendor for solutions, did you have to demonstrate some level of success, or meet certain, show certain? How do you justify the expenditure, and what do you point to say it was successful?
So we had a certain amount of money that we were spending currently on tools. We shifted over from some tools to other tools, and over to Contrast, and the overall amount that we spent on licenses decreased, and we had a higher level of protection, being that we had a RASP involved, as well as finding vulnerabilities much early on. So I think knowing that vulnerabilities remediated in dev cost less than in QA or production, that mixed with the fact that the actual dollar amount paid for licenses was down, I think overall management sees it as a good win.
Well, better performance at equal to lower price. Yeah, management's always going to see that as a win. It kind of fits the business model. Good. Okay, with that, we're nearing. Oh, we did get a question in here. Did your team have to do any customizations for integration, tools, workflows that weren't supported by were not supported by Team Server?
So yeah, when you can integrate into Jira, but that pretty much just gives the data to Jira. So if you have workflows within Jira that you wanted to have, automated, let's say you wanted to say, hey, if any vulnerabilities come from this server, I want to route it to the team or the user, the person. I mean, if it's in development environment and the workstation ID, the server is there, that developer that uses that laptop is the one that coded that vulnerability. You can send a ticket directly to them, right? But all that would have to be automated on your side. The rest of it it doesn't take any kind of integrating or configuration. It's pretty much all supported by Contrast.
Okay,
I would say one more component of that, and when we're in the pipeline, there is going to be some amount of coding and configuring, right? It has the ability to, a plugin that says, hey, go back and ask Contrast, right? For Jenkins, Jenkins can say, hey, we're querying you to tell us, what levels you have, but we have to set the threshold of what we want it to be, right? So that's configuration on our end too. We have to say, yeah, no criticals or no highs or no, whatever it is that you want. That's configuration you do. But they would, Contrast, of course, would support you in providing the details on how to get that done.
Okay, had one other question. I'll rephrase just a little bit. So we talked about web app firewalls. Everybody's sort of familiar with that concept. RASP, or runtime application self-protection, is a sort of a newer concept. Have you had operational examples of where the RASP actually did Fender, you mentioned struts and so on, but have you had any operational examples where you can point to it and tell manager or whatever, have examples that it did improve your security posture?
Well, it did. We did. So again, we layer, right? So sometimes one layer lets something go and then it gets blocked, right? So anything that's getting blocked at the application RASP, to me, that means it's better, because if it wasn't there, it got through for some reason our other layers. So when we have exploits being protected and blocked, instead of actually being a true exploit to us, we're like, hey, there it is. There's your example.
Okay, we're just about at the end of our time slot here. We got all the audience questions, so let me give our audience out there some resources to look for to get more information. There's the URL for the overall list of all the what works case studies we've done at SANS here. I mentioned the Difference Makers Awards where we list the people there. You'll see you see the URL for that. It'll be updated with the 2018 winners on Monday, but you can find links right now to previous winners. There's Contrast Security's URL if you do want to get more information about their product. If you are watching a recorded version of this webinar, or you just thought of a question right as I ended things here, you can send your questions to q@sans.org. And if it's something you need, you have a question for Joshua or me or Contrast Security, we'll get you the right answer. So with that, I want to turn it over to Carol, back to Carol for any final words.
All right, well, thank you so much, John and Joshua, for your great presentation, and to Contrast Security for sponsoring this webcast, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.